All right, so I'm gonna go like 3, 2, 1, 0. So yes, hello and welcome to a new podcast of my interview series. Today I have the pleasure to talk to Professor Hugo Fernandez, who was my teacher in art appreciation last semester. Um, Professor Fernandez was born in Miami in Florida and studied photography in Miami. After having several trips as a professional photographer, he then went off to Yale School of Arts in order to earn an MFA in fine art in photography in 1993. He moved to New York City after graduate school and began working at LaGuardia Community College in 1994. That's almost 30 years ago, where he's been serving as an excellent and much appreciated professor. I can speak in my own experience that it was an excellent class that I took with him in a gallery and museum seminar in New York City. So I'm happy to welcome you, Professor Fernandez, to my podcast.
Thank you, Sandra.
Yes. So I would like to start with a question first. What brought you to teaching in general?
Well, it's interesting because while I was in undergrad, I was an English lit minor. And I remember doing a presentation. I was taking a class called Western Literature, which I thought at the time was going to be, Cervantes and stuff like that. And it turned out to be Westerns like cowboys, and Indians or whatever, stories like that from the American West. And we had to do a presentation. And I remember at the time that one of the things that was included as a Western was Jack Kerouac's On the Road, and which I was really into the beatniks at the time. And so I did a presentation about, interestingly enough, I didn't really, I don't think I had even finished reading the book at the time or read it before and just kind of winged it. But I had, I put up on the board all the names of all of these people that he had interacted with and their publications. And I was playing like some Miles Davis as I spoke, and had to do this 5-minute presentation, and and I got stuck, and I just said, well, they just drove across the country, and it was really not the greatest presentation. But at the end, my professor, who was this really great guy, he was not only he liked Westerns, and he was also an Arthurian scholar, Dr. Dwyer from Florida International University. Was, I don't know if he's still there or he's passed. But anyhow, he said to me, you ought to think about being a teacher, which I had never thought about at the time. So fast forward, when you go to graduate school, one of the things they do is they have you teaching, help out. And of course, all of your faculty are, obviously they're working photographers, but they're also teachers. And, we always would say to them, oh, it's, what a great gig, right? I mean, everybody, I appreciated my teachers, and, I thought that was, whoa, that would be a great gig. And so when I got out, I was, trying to figure out what I was going to do in New York. And one of my classmates who'd gotten out a year before me was working at LaGuardia, and he was teaching a class where he was teaching high school students on Saturdays as a kind of a perk, because they're also taking SAT prep courses. So the photo class was like a fun thing to do. So I was hired initially to work with high school students, a program called College Now, Liberty Partnership. I still know the guy who runs it. And, that's how, and then of course they got to know me at the college, started offering me adjunct opportunities.
Right.
And, a few other things happened in between, but eventually, a friend of mine who I'd helped get a gig at the college became the chair. There was an opportunity to transition from being an adjunct to full-time, which he helped create. And next thing you knew, I was a full-time faculty member at the college.
So before we getting into what we want to talk about, which is artists, or even especially the role of artists today, just in general, being able to communicate knowledge to students, how much does that give to you compared to like what you do in your artistic pathway, like taking pictures, making
Right.
art, creating art? Like is there some type of a connection or difference?
It's totally a connection. I mean, interesting that, the guy I studied with at Yale, Todd Papa George, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Paris is Burning.
Of course, yeah.
Uh, so at the end of the film, the director, I forgot her name right now, but she thanks him.
I actually have it on VHS, believe it or not, this movie.
Very good. Yeah. And anyhow, so we were, to bust his chops, we were going like, oh, well, why do you think she thanked you? Or no, we asked her because she came to Yale and showed the film. And afterwards we asked her, a few of us went up and she says, why did you thank Todd? And she says, because when I took his class, I learned that was the first time I ever learned that you could use photographs to communicate, ideas. And that kind of, for me, just kind of coalesced everything that's, what I was trying to do photographically is, communicate ideas. So, but, I guess I'm one of these people, jack of all trades kind of thing, even though I am a master in photography, I'm a
Right.
jack of all trades, so as a kid, I did theater stuff. I did music stuff. I mean, I in college I wrote. And so I've been exposed to many different ways to communicate. And, even when I was an artist studying art, I got involved with some performance art activities and putting on exhibitions. So, for me, it's always about, we were talking about this before, like this is a half-hour show. Most people can't watch more than 2 minutes, right?
Right.
But so how do you get somebody to stick around? And for me, it's, there is this notion that, in education, part of it is there's an entertainment factor. I used to run a program for the Guggenheim called Learning Through Art. And, we talked about like, how can you use art to teach students? And the simplest example I ever used to say was, singing the ABCs. I mean, I don't know if you do that in Switzerland, but, A,
We
B,
do.
C, D.
A, B,
So
C, D, E,
yeah,
F.
so
Yeah.
using and finding a way, an engaging way to teach and learn. And I guess I think about that all the time. I mean, you've experienced it in my class, and part of that comes out of frustration of being a teacher, because I mean, I started out like all of my professors, art in the dark, turning out the lights, looking at slides, talking, and people tune out. And I guess I'm a bit of a narcissist, so I can't, when people don't pay attention, and it upsets me. So I started trying to come up with ways that students had to keep be participating
Right.
in order to get through the class, or to, in many cases, earn grades, earn points, whatever it is. So I've spent.
There is a difference between artist and education, and like I was going to save this question to the end, but I'm gonna just jump in on this right now.
Cut to the chase.
Because, yeah, exactly. Right? Because we are being very spontaneous here, is and we will talk about artists, art, and etc. again, but like if any artist is watching this right now, what would you recommend them, if they feel, hey, I have this idea of being an artist, what do you recommend them, how to get on in their process? Go to school, learn about art, do it yourself, believe in yourself, or what would be a recommended process in that path, for a potential master artist for our future,
Well, I mean,
from a master professor?
Well, a professor with a master's, yeah. There's a big, this is a big argument. I mean, and I've been in the room where students, we've had people doing presentations who did not get degrees in art, and were working in the field. And the student would say, do you really think that you need to go to school to be an artist? And and the people, these people would like look at you, because you're paying them to be there, and they think like you're gonna rat them out, like the whole thing's a scam. But it's it's going to school, being an artist and going to school, they're like two different things. I mean, as I say to people who want to be artists, I say like, well, I mean, hope you first of all, it should be something that you have to do. You almost like you don't have a choice, because there are a lot of easier ways to make a living than being an artist.
So at this point, let's just start with a basic question in that case. Like, how do you define art? What is art? And what is an artist? I mean, I'm sure you were thinking about that long enough. So that we know what we're talking about when you're
sure
explaining, what an artist should do in there.
I mean, it's funny because I made a documentary about this as a art artist in the place of art in today's society back in undergrad. It was very boring, long. I mean, it was really long, and I had to
still link it where I can link things like that.
I'd have to transfer it from VHS.
Oh yeah, well
that's I'd love to too, and I'd love
to. We'll do that.
But so I have been thinking about this for a long time. Yeah, but and it's funny because when I teach my class, not in the class that you just took, but in other classes, I'll start with an exercise called Art in Your Life, where people have to write a 1-page writing sample of what they think the role that art plays in their lives, which a lot of people who come in to some of my classes, which are art appreciation courses mainly, show up, they don't think they have any relationship with art. And so part of that first assignment is to kind of expand the definition of what might be thought of as art. Most people think of art as like painting and drawing and stuff like that. But again, is to show them that they do have a relationship with art, whether they realize it or not. So art can be pretty much anything. I mean, if you look up the definition, typically it's tied to something which is made with certain materials, and the word expression comes up a lot, to express yourself. But it can be, basically, I think I was thinking about this over the weekend, that obviously it's when you're using your creativity in a process, because, they talk about, I mean, something my students talk about a lot is like, as a basketball player, he's an artist, or whatever it is, any kind of field. So if you're using your creative thinking in what you do, it could be thought, what you produce could be thought of as artistic expression.
So that could still be a Wall Street banker, because they can use their creativity to create more money than they had before. So there must be some type of a limitation as well too.
Well, I'm just saying that yeah, they do it. They use their creativity. They're like kind of an artist in a field. There's actually a great book called Tuxedo Park, which is all about that, how this guy made a lot of money and actually used that money to sponsor scientists to develop things, including what became the Manhattan Project, the atom bomb, right?
Right, yeah.
But anyhow, but
art, the way we see art is like, I don't know, usually masterpieces, right? That actually also long over a certain period of time, and not just a scribble I made in my notebook. So where is the difference there? Like where can we draw a line?
So the masterpiece was actually something that was devised for somebody to basically show off their skills, right? You became an apprentice and you studied under a master. Eventually, when you were ready to graduate, you became a journeyman and you traveled to learn from other masters. And then when you found a town that needed your type of art making, the guild would say to you, the guildsman of that town would say, okay, well, make this, like make the Virgin holding
19th
Jesus.
Century. And
we're talking about the Middle Ages. We're talking about medieval,
or even Middle Ages. Okay, yeah.
Medieval art and up to the Renaissance, basically between the fall of the Roman Empire and the beginning of the Renaissance. And so you made this work of art and it was judged, and it was called your masterpiece, because if they liked it and they said it was okay, then you became a master.
Because it's been judged.
It was judged by other masters.
Institution, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so it was basically like a skill. They told you what to make and you made it and you showed off your skill in whatever the particular art form was, the material. But you've taken my class, so you know that my definition of art is unusual. The first thing that I typically say to people comes from one of my former, my boss who actually hired me at LaGuardia, Bruce Brooks, who's a painter. Art is, is useless. It's an object which is created, which has no other use than than what it is, which is a painting or a sculpture. But when you start thinking of other things, like you talked about, for example, designing clothing, it can be artistic, but people
Might
wear
get
it, so
into
it's a
that. Yeah,
useful.
exactly. Yeah.
So we got into this and or thing where the second
Mhm.
part of the definition comes in, which is it's something that's made better than it
Mhm.
needed to be made. Like
Before
for
it was
example,
made, yeah, like
a golden hammer is my best example, because you can make a hammer, that's a tool, right? But if you make
or
a golden
a
hammer,
golden toilet, so to speak. The one
exactly, the
that-
golden toilet, who needs to dip a toilet or make a toilet out of gold? It's better than it has to be. That's when it becomes, it has a use, because people were using it at the Guggenheim. I think
Right.
people were actually going to the bathroom in it.
I think
But
it was the MoMA Guggenheim. Oh,
well,
it
the
was
Guggenheim had
You're
it in
right.
one
Yeah,
of their
exactly.
bathrooms.
Yeah.
I don't know who else
Yeah.
had,
And
before
then
it
they
got
had a long
stolen.
line. Yeah, exactly.
But anyhow, but you don't need to make it out of gold. So put those two together, and that kind of gives you a depth. But obviously I'm being facetious in a sense.
Well, I mean, it's still interesting, right? But like the way, and now because I'm interviewing you, I will go to your personal, because everybody has their own definition of art, I suppose. So like using your definition of art, what is a role of art? Like what is it like what does it have to represent? Or the way you see art as well, and that would be maybe a second question as well. Is it innate? Is it like a priori, as Kant would say? Like, since I'm a philosophy student, I have to come up with some philosophers here. Would you think it's something you can detect, or is it very arbitrary to understand art as a concept?
Understanding. I mean,
with your definition, yeah.
You know it when you see it. When you say a priori, you mean it's like knowledge that you had beforehand. Like anybody could come along and look at it and say it's art, or is it something that comes from education?
I mean, yeah, you would have to, again, like, because many people have their different. Oh, here comes the fire brigade. Well, we are in Brooklyn after all. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You, like, again, like many people will have different definitions of art, but the way you understand it yourself, can you initially know, or do you have to like learn it before? When you see something, you can point the finger and say, this is art and this is not? Is it like something you had to learn, or is it?
Well, yeah. I mean, this is the thing too, is that people talk about it. I mean, you don't have to go to art school to be moved by something, right? That you could see, this object and be taken by it, but having said that, there obviously, more so in modern art now, well, I think always in art, there's more to be gotten from it if you have a certain understanding about the ideas behind it. For example, this happens all the time with my students. If I get students in my class who have no experience with Christianity, and I take them to the cloisters to see, religious art, they're just kind of looking at as these objects of people. They don't know the stories behind it. They don't understand the iconography. And so what I do is I give them this thing, I call it a cheat sheet, and of Christianity, the Jesus cheat sheet, and it tells them the story of Jesus, so they can, when they see things, they'll know what it might be about.
I mean, that is a good comparison, because you could like ask the student the question, do you actually enjoy what you're seeing without even knowing what it's supposed to represent? Yeah. And would that qualify for an artistic value, or?
But again, it's like, everybody comes to it with what they have and what they get out of it. And there's no right or wrong. It just is. But so if I have a student walk into the unicorn tapestry room, they can think, wow, this is amazing. These these things, these tapestries that were made by a bunch of people of these, they're beautiful and stories. And I can tell them, well, that comes from hand dyes. But then if I can tell them the story, well, that, okay, now let's look at it from the perspective of the unicorn being Jesus, or let's look at it from the perspective of the unicorn being a bachelor, being, dragged into marriage. It takes on a whole nother thing for them. So, but
Right.
so art can work on many levels. And I think, a lot of times people get caught up with, oh, but you don't get it. And, like you're looking at a Jackson Pollock painting, and you don't understand all the ideas that, and a lot of my
And
students will many
also
times
time,
say,
actually, that's what I usually am stunned with. Like, people don't understand that there were different times before, especially, you as a professor will know, you will have a lot of young students that don't understand that 100 years ago, well, Jackson Pollock was a little later, but like 100 years ago, there was no cell phones. Like some students, they grew up not knowing what a world would be without, let's say, a cell phone or digital revolution or whatever you want to call it. So being radical in a time, in terms of being an artist, that adds a lot to this in a way.
And
And it's hard to actually, even for me, or probably for you as well, understanding what it means to radicalize an idea and push it so it will last for a long time. But when it was done at the time, it's been so, maybe sometimes even ahead of its time, that it can only be appreciated much later.
Well, that's the problem when you start making like shock art. If your goal is to shock people, is you can only shock them for so long, or shock them so many times.
Right.
And for example, now, artist painting is competing against immersive, video games, AI, where people can put on goggles and literally be in an environment. Mm-hmm. And it would be exciting to see an artist, and people are doing this, where they can create an immersive experience to try to keep up. But yeah, right. It is a problem when I show them something, a paint, even in the the Impressionists, they shocked people. They pretty much flipped people out. And that's because before them, most painting, at least from that period, coming out of neoclassical painting, it was representational. They were used to looking at things that looked like, photographs before there were even photographs. But when photography comes
photography
along, takes away that job.
Exactly. Yeah.
Painters were free to do what they wanted. And the first thing they started doing was, Impressionism, which is a direct reaction to light in real time. And people started looking at these things and they're going like, what, that freaked people out.
Right. In that sense, it's a very easy, but yet very difficult question. And of course, I'm going to have to ask it. What is your favorite artist? And, it's an easy one, but there is contemporary or of all time, like the GOAT of artists, or like for you in your head, like which name would you drop first? And, it could be Mozart as well, which is a musician that not many people, or like a composer that not many people would associate with art, maybe. So it's a very...
Yeah, there was a song by Jonathan Richman called "I'm a Sensitive Artist," and it's all about liking music that nobody listens to, reading books that nobody's read, and to be kind of cool. Yeah, exactly. But again, I guess you would, to do that, you might. It depends. Like if you had to pick let's say we picked an object. Like if you could have a painting, right? That's like, I was, for whatever reason, it came into my head was like a Rothko. I don't know.
Really?
And I don't know if you've ever stood in front of a Rothko, actually, because I live near New Haven, so I can go to the Yale Art School. They actually have a Rothko which has a bench, and you can sit in front of it, and it's pretty.
At the Metropolitan, they have a whole room with like these Rothkos, and then funny enough, it's one of my mom's if not her favorite artist. So that is very interesting.
It's but obviously Rothko has passed. So if you're thinking of contemporary working artists, you
It's
know,
maybe the one you don't even know, right? Because there's
I mean, I could,
so much out there right
yeah,
now.
it's hard, but you know, like so I like to say one of my favorite portrait photographers is one of my former teachers, this woman Judith Joy Ross, who works with a large format camera and takes amazing pictures.
Like
And
a
actually
Mamiya
another,
or a Hasselblad or
no, we're talking about 8x10,
oh, okay, okay,
and
okay.
makes prints in gold tone. So she, as a portrait photographer, she's probably certainly the best of her generation,
What's her name?
Judith Joy Ross. But then I think of another professor who, as a landscape photographer, Lois Connor, who was a, you know, does panoramas, uses a 7x17 camera. And these are, you know, amazing photographers and artists.
So for you,
You know,
a contemporary like
well, I'm just thinking
favorite
of people
artist
working.
should be in, I mean, in your world, a photographer in that sense,
Well,
right?
I just photographers come to
Well, it
mind
comes right because that's your
if I, you know,
profession.
because I'm not, you know, and you know, painting is really, what's interesting is that painting's in a real quandary now. It's hard to you know, with painting because it's, you know, what do you make a painting? How do you make a painting? How do you make a painting in, you know, after Pollock or after Ad Reinhardt, you know, who used to make
Question,
like
yeah.
these black paintings, you know, I mean, Gerhard Richter, for example,
Right.
those are pretty, you know, amazing. And actually some of the work that's going on figuratively now, I think of it, there's a, you know, there's a great show going on right now at the Met, which is a craft, I mean, at the Whitney, that craft show, some of the work that was in there was pretty amazing. So I think of, you know, I'm a big fan of Judy Chicago, but, you know, probably the most important work she did, she made in the late 70s, early 80s, which is The Dinner Party. So I don't know, I think about people like that. So if you're
I
asking
mean,
me
if
who
you
the
say
most important artist was of the 20th
for
century, then I
okay,
would say Warhol in the last half, and I would say Duchamp in the first half, even though most people would say, what are you, crazy? Picasso was the greatest painter. And you're right, they're right. As a singular artist, the impact he had was on painting, and sculpture was pretty formidable,
right,
ceramics even. But I think of the way Duchamp changed the way people thought about art, and the
right.
way that, you know, Warhol changed the way that people think about culture and art.
Again,
It's hard.
this
It's hard.
radical revolution to make
Right.
something completely different and still have it in the category of art in a way. But
Yeah.
in the long run, people will remember that change. If they were the first or not, well, we will. It's hard to define because who
Yeah.
knows if Duchamp or Warhol didn't see somebody else that wasn't
Well,
able to
well,
monetize or to industrialize what they did.
Warhol saw Duchamp. You know what I
Well,
mean?
he did, yeah.
I
That's
mean, you know, if you think of pop art is
inevitable, yeah,
basically neo-Dada, and
yeah.
you know, I mean, Duchamp saw Picasso initially when he was a cubist,
Vice versa,
but
actually, right?
he, you know, just this idea of, you know, really putting language to this notion that it's not art till somebody sees it.
Right.
You know what I
I mean,
mean? That's
I think
pretty.
it's yeah.
And
It's like when you
context.
hear is a tree that falls in a forest. Does it
Does it
make
make a
noise or
sound?
not? If exactly
It
like
makes a wave, but how do you
you
define sound? Does the
right,
sound
yeah.
need a human ear to make it sound, or is it just,
Well,
until
we're
then, is it
going too
just a
far into
wave?
philosophy right now. As much as I would love to do that,
Well, and you know
but
what? Art has gone, you know, philosophy has had a very, you know, that philosophy has had a very large impact on art, certainly in the 20th century, if not previously. So, you know, it's not unusual that we're talking about both at the same time.
can you make an example on that?
Well, I'm just thinking of, for example, of how philosophical ideas got mixed up with art criticism in the late, you know, in the 20th century, and
Like trying to
postmodernism.
put like art
Yeah.
into words in a way, right? Like
Well,
you look at
basically,
something and you put it into words. So for maybe a broader or deeper whatever public, you can they can grasp something with is easier for them, which is words, rather than looking at a picture that might be talking to them without words.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. And I talked about, it's in the book too, or some of the books that we've read together, which is, there's basically, Joseph Campbell was a big fan of James Joyce. And he talks about in The Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, Stephen Dedalus, and his ideas around art, comes up with this kind of this definition, which there's three types of art. There is pornography, which is a type of art that demands, it's trying to possess the thing that it imitates. Then there is the didactic type of art, which is trying to teach you something, but then there is the epiphanic, which is the kind of an art that arrests you. And in arresting you, those first few seconds, there are no words. Like when you're moved by something, the best example I can give is like the first time you've seen something like the Grand Canyon, where you're just kind of like, you're just kind of caught by the feeling of it. And then slowly language comes and you begin to make sense of what you're looking at. And for me, it's the epiphanic is the only I've made didactic art, I've certainly made pornographic art, but the epiphanic, that kind of art, which is now that what I'm constantly trying to create. And what's really interesting is that sometimes I try to do it with language, because my art now, one of the things I'm doing is I'm writing about family photographs, and so I try to create that kind of experience, but I'm doing it through language, which is really difficult to do. How do you get somebody who's reading something and using this kind of logical aspect of their mind, and then suddenly send them off into the abstract?
Right. I mean, my personal philosophical approach to art was always, and correct me or like add or deduct what you can take from that a piece of art is a form of language as well. So maybe let's go to, I grew up like Mozart, Picasso, whatever, like I'm just using a Picasso now because that was like the stereotype artist when I grew up. You look at a Picasso, he knew what he was saying on his paintings. He knew he will not have a lot of people that will receive that language, but whoever will receive it is not going to be able to receive it in words, spoken or written. He will receive it through those pictures. That's what made him or many other artists so great. So I would actually maybe challenge you to the question that art is a form of language that only a few chosen can speak and a few chosen can receive. Some can speak it but not receive it. Some can receive it but they can speak it. But it's some type of and we talked about that word, transcendent language that is beyond the way we use words. And we have different languages anyway. We have from German, French, English, etc., like Latin languages, Chinese. So it's another type of language.
Universal.
Maybe not, because it's not many people can speak it in the way I see it. Some people can just like be the sender, some can be the receiver, some maybe can be both, but it's something somewhere there. But I would personally define it as a sort of language myself in that way.
And I wouldn't, it's a visual, like I said before, we're communicating ideas, ideally intelligent ones. But I would challenge you in saying that, everybody, if I had asked a room full of children before the age of 10, how many of you are artists? Every hand in the room goes up. It is only in time as we grow older and we start doubting ourselves, and we start becoming specialists, that we suddenly start saying we're not artists. But everybody was an artist at the time. This, here's my daughter. I don't know if you could see this, but this is my daughter's drawing, and she's
what is very what is very unusual about that drawing, and I just had to learn that, because here is actually a drawing of my niece, which is very similar in a way.
Yeah,
It's
I mean,
that the profile, like children usually apparently don't paint profiles. It's a very unusual skill for children,
oh, really?
like
Yeah.
kids to have.
Well, it's
Yeah.
interesting
But go
because,
ahead. Yeah.
they talk about like in Egyptian art, they talk about, the way Egyptians used to do, hieroglyphics, and they talk about the people challenge, oh, the Egyptians didn't know how to do proportion, all these other things. They certainly they did, but they chose not to. Because they followed a convention. They always rendered things in a manner that someone looking at it would know what they were looking at it. Like that's why the shoulders and the head is, they're trying so that you would know what you were looking at. You didn't need to, be
Right.
trained in it. And you compare children's art, that like children's art kind of follows the growth of representational art if you follow it from early childhood to about age 5. But what's really amazing about this drawing by my daughter is if you can see it.
Put it down. I put this in because it looks
Yeah,
really not so
but this
different,
see what's
right?
here. I don't know if you can see it, that he's carrying, I'm trying to point and I can't
Yeah,
backwards.
I can try
He's
to see.
holding keys. Those are a set of keys. And I knew looking, and with the hat, so this is actually a rendering, her portrait of my father, who used to wear a
Oh,
hat and always
wow.
had keys, and she had a very close relationship with, and before he passed. And I pulled that out. I want to frame that. So I think
Trying
everybody
to actually
can.
represent, it's some type of getting something out of, is your daughter, you said, right, made that?
She did that when she was a
Getting,
child.
exactly, getting a message out that was inside that she couldn't communicate otherwise. And
Oh,
I mean,
she could, but she
I don't
chose to
know.
do it this way. I mean, she used to say, "I love you, Abuelo."
Right, right, right.
But she also did this too, which to me, that's what that's saying. Like she cared so much about this guy that she created this drawing of him.
Right, right.
So,
I mean, here is something that comes in mind because, I did my final presentation on Keith Haring, and Keith Haring was, famously known for making childlike art. And they say he's stuck at age 8, maybe, like, I mean, people say different things, but that's, some people say that he's stuck with his art in a childlike age that made him so great. So, I mean, the conclusion then would be, is a good artist maybe a person that has not been filtered or has not lost that open-minded view on a world, to, again, like translate something in an adult state that can only see from a child's perspective.
I mean, Picasso used to say that he loved child art, and wished that he could return to that
Right.
kind of freedom, because as a child we have yet,
You don't have all these
society
filters
has yet to tell us what we can't do.
Exactly.
We have the freedom. I mean, my daughter was making. Remember my daughter making a short film, a puppet film, at her, because nobody had told her that she couldn't make a movie. You know what I mean? And so yeah, I think, and again, I was thinking about this today, that I could only imagine what I might be able to accomplish if I didn't have to think about all the other stuff I have to do. The things I have to read, the emails I have to send, and that's what gets in the way. You need a certain irresponsibility as an artist to at least I do. I'm a binge artist. There are certainly those who every morning, they wake up.
Actually, yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, some people can wake up and make a painting.
Yeah. And maybe
I can't make art that way. I can't make art like wake up and make art for an hour and then go to work. I'm a binge artist, which means like I got to give me 2 weeks where I don't have to answer an email or look at talk to, and go make, I'll come back with a bunch of stuff.
I will do it in the last day because you also need pressure.
Yeah,
right?
you need to release. And that happened when I went to Cuba the second time. That happened where I spent the first week just kind of taking in the culture. And then I finally got to the point where I felt comfortable making pictures. And then my cousin kept saying, like, aren't you going to take any pictures?
Do you think
And of
pressure is
course
an
I did it all
important,
in the end.
like, I mean, I'm gonna weave two topics together because that's an important one I wanted to talk as well, which is money. Like, does an expensive art piece make money, an expensive art piece make an art piece better or not? Because we are, looking at values, when people talk about art, in very generally spoken in public, they say, oh yeah, it's a Da Vinci that goes over the counter for, or whatever artist goes over the counter for millions and millions of dollars. Does that actually really help the value? Because that would mean that an artist has to think of money or not, because we live in a monetary system, which is not all too bad, but it might harm that artistic values.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of, when you were talking, I thought you were talking about in the materials or the machinery that you use to make the art. And I remember, going back to medieval art, one of the ways you came up with the price, you weren't allowed to make profit. The church was against that. But you basically figured out the value of the object by the materials you used, the gold, and it was really
Right.
like a no to fake it, to use like,
it was like tits for tats type of
yeah,
thing,
there
and
was
then a little bit
but
of
now,
labor costs maybe,
yeah,
but yeah.
now it's about, the value of an object is based on what people determine it to be, and mostly people who are in positions of authority, like, gallerists or curators or collectors,
Critics, etc. Yeah.
yeah, or the marketplace. And how much does something cost? Probably $1 more than somebody just paid for it.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So, but
but it might change with, like, as you
yeah,
see, like curves of Bitcoin, for example,
yeah,
that could change drastically, but in the long
but
run.
yeah, and you're talking about commerce at that point.
Right, yeah.
But
I mean, but
uh,
does that help the discourse of art itself as a concept, or is that a separate subject? The value,
it depends on
monetary value of art.
yeah, it depends on what you're gonna, what again, it's about what matters to you in artwork. Some people are excited by that experience of buying and selling and making, and they are excited about the works, and great. I'm happy for them. And it's not necessarily the things I'm interested in, specifically in photographs. But one of the things that's very hard, because people, again, we're very dualistic. It's either good or it's bad. There's no gray for folks. It's very hard to make art without money, because people have to live and eat. You know what I mean? You have to have shelter.
Earlier that it has to be like almost, I forgot the word, like recklessly, like you have to be like shameless in order to become like that artist with artistic value rather than monetary value. I forgot the word.
Well, you can be shameless in,
or like,
it's interesting because you just brought up this idea, and I forget what it comes from, but this idea that you can be like, you can be in the guise of a lamb, but have the heart of a lion,
right,
in a sense that you can be, in your art making, you can have that kind of freedom, a sort of shamelessness that you won't, people, and when I say shameless,
yeah,
that you won't let, exactly. In the sense that not that you behave, be outside the mores of society, but that you will not let other people tell you how to make art or what it could be about. But you could also be, meanwhile, you're, the solid citizen in society. And it's a hard thing to walk, because a lot of times what people take it on, like, I've had a lot of friends pass on, growing up, and they thought that they had to live their life the way they made their art. Like there was the same thing, and that lead, the a kind of a bohemian approach, right. Which, in the end, most bohemians don't live past 30, or if they
maybe
do, they don't look very good.
Or yeah.
But, so there's, it's like, how do you live in the society at the same time, but not be governed by it, at least internally? You can follow the laws, but in the meanwhile, right. When you make your work, and that's, which is the toughest thing as an artist, is to, one of the things that, interestingly, in art of the 20th century was this individualism expression and through, in formalism and historicism, making it new, constantly making it new, which is a lot of pressure. And just
Right.
because it's new doesn't make it better. So for me,
Well, if
it's
it
more
is
about making something.
new, it's at least a good risk to take, right? Like, I mean, if
It,
you see a
it keeps
vision that hasn't been exploited before, you
it
never
keeps
know.
people
Maybe in
interested.
300 years from now, it will be, yeah, but
Yeah,
maybe
it
in
keeps people
300 years
interested.
from
But for me, I'm much more interested in somebody telling me something that they know through their work that I've never heard before. As when my students always ask me, they always say, "Hey, professor, what kind of picture do you want me to take?" And I always say, "One that I've never seen before." And so there's two ways to solve that problem. One is to try to make it in some sort of wacky way with different materials, and they try that. The other way could just be to show me your own experience, your own life, because I have no access to your home. I have no access to your family. I have no
right, 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 right,
access to your community, where you work, all of these things. So show me something that I don't know that you do know. You know
right.
what I mean? And that's the way you can solve that problem. Uh, Modernism, which is, obviously ended with postmodernism, but this idea that and historicism and all these things that you just constantly have to make that new. I appreciate that. That's for formalists. That's for people who are very caught up with how things are made. For me, and I play that game too. I make panoramas. I stitch them together in digital stuff, with digital materials.
Right.
But
Like that's
people
actual
are,
labor, right? Like
yeah.
adding.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
that
most of
was
it's done
when
by
we
the
talk about
computer.
Keith. When we yeah, I mean, yeah. Today with algorithms, you can
Yeah,
achieve
right.
a lot. But like when you think about Keith Haring,
Yeah.
and talking about value, like what he did, he just did a couple of tags, and that was the end of that.
Yeah,
And
but I think people, in the case of Herring, I think people,
and it was easy that
they
way.
look
It's
at the way
not
the thing is made and they get very caught up with that, and they forget that he was saying a lot of things through that work, and they were good things. Take care of yourself,
a message. Yeah,
appreciate
exactly.
life,
Yeah, exactly. There you go.
be
Excellent.
kind
Yeah.
to everybody. And
And contrary to that, if I
yeah.
may ask, like that is an important question I wanted to ask you as well, is there a taboo for art? Is there something art should not do, not show, not communicate, not be? Is there any taboo that,
Uh,
I mean, I
I mean,
know, like I was,
I would, I would think the one thing to not be, first of all, is you don't be, don't be somebody else. It's easier to be,
oh,
like
good
that
one. Yeah, I
phrase,
like
be
that.
yourself, because everybody else is taken. So that's
Or
number one.
find yourself and try to at least not
Well, just don't
go beyond
imitate other
that.
people.
But
Don't
that would be
steal
yourselves. Well,
other
that is
people's
no
shtick.
plagiarism. Yeah.
Don't plagiarize. Though even
But that would be part of you too. Like I always hesitated with that stealing part. Like if you imitate others, you steal ideas. That might be you. I'm a thief.
well,
So
I mean, look,
that is me
Picasso
now.
said, a mediocre artist borrows, a great artist steals outright. And I mean, if you think of Sherry Levine, who used to appropriate, she called appropriate, photographing a Walker Evans photograph and then calling it, after Walker Evans, basically just showing you the picture again, but it's been reproduced by her.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
That
was a conceptual idea. But there she has brought something new to it. She's not showing it and saying, this is a photograph I took.
Right.
She's actually acknowledging the fact that she copied another photograph but is appropriating and saying, like,
So
I
it is
photographed
possible to be someone
know.
else, but where is there still a taboo in art that is
I think
not...
the worst taboo is don't be predictable.
That is good. Yeah, I like that.
And by doing, that means, there's, one of the things about art is
don't be lazy in a way.
There's a labor to it. Exactly. There is a labor. And even
don't be lazy either in the thought process or
exactly.
in the actual making process or whatever it is. Try to push yourself over your own limits.
Don't be predictable.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't like when you watch a movie and you know what's going to happen, and all of a sudden you're like, oh.
Or you read
I know where this is going.
One page is like...
So like that's probably the... Otherwise, there's not many
I
other...
like that. Yeah, that is a great...
no other
that's
taboos.
a great taboo, yeah. I
Anyhow,
think we already pretty
we're over.
over time at this point.
You can always edit stuff out.
I do not know. This is a
What you think doesn't
shortcut.
matter. So,
Everything matters.
right.
Nothing really matters to me. That's a beautiful song, actually, right? Bohemian Rhapsody from
Yes,
Queen.
right.
So we'll leave it at this. I'm going to say thank you very much.
Thank you
That was a
for,
pleasure. I will be in your show, I believe, in March at some point.
I think we're doing it on the 21st,
Exactly. That's what I have written down. So if anybody's still
1:00.
watching, I will put it down here in the link
Yes.
or whatever.
LaGuardia Web Radio, WLGR.
I will link that up. I'll stop the recording right now. So I just say thank you.
Thank you.